A few years ago, when I was pastor of a church on the mainland, I walked into church. I think it was the Sunday right before the 4th of July, and there was a gigantic American flag that normally wasn't there right behind the pulpit. And it kind of caught me by surprise because no one told me it was going to be there. And I remember just thinking, wow, okay. And I started thinking about what I wanted to say about that, if anything. And so I asked the guy that put it up. I didn't know at the time, who even put it up there. I said, "So tell me about the American flag on Sunday morning." And he said, "Oh, it's just a tradition we have. Every Sunday before the 4th of July, we put it up. Unless the 4th of July ends up landing on a Sunday, then it's on that Sunday. But it's just something we've done ever since we've had the church here." And I said, "Okay, good to know." At our next church council meeting, I brought it up. I just wanted to know what that meant to people and what it might mean to visitors, including people from other countries. And we had a wonderful conversation, and part of where the conversation went was, what might the message be that the cross in the church was this big and the American flag went almost from the ceiling to the floor? And I shared with them that in the church I grew up in, at least through high school, we always had, as you walked into the church, there was the Christian flag over there and the American flag over there. And I grew up thinking that being a Christian was the same thing as being an American. And being an American was the same thing as being a Christian. And I shared that with the people that were in the council meeting, the council members, and it was just a wonderful conversation having people share about what the message might be to everyone who walked in the door. And most of the people felt like, well, it's okay to have an American flag. Somebody said, well, if we're going to put one up, can we at least put a nice one up because it had holes and tears and stuff in it? But it was an interesting conversation, and one of the things that came up was the book that I quoted at the beginning of the service, Resident Aliens by Stanley Hauerwas and William Willimon. And it's a book that I read at some point when I was in seminary, maybe doing some post-seminary studies, but I remember reading this book and thinking, wow, we are called to be a countercultural community as the Church of Jesus Christ. Just like in Jesus' day, when he said things that were very different from what their government said, which at the time was the Roman Empire. But Jesus kept talking about love, regardless of what was happening in the Roman Empire. And if he disagreed with something that was going on, he just came out and said it. That doesn't seem very loving to me. Here's what an altogether new kingdom or reign or realm would look like if God were truly in charge. So as I'm visiting with this church council several years ago on the mainland, I just said, I just want to make sure that when we have an American flag, that we know that that's not who or what we've come to worship. I want to make sure that we respect our flag and that those who are patriotic because they are citizens here get that. But I also knew that there was a lady from Japan at that church and there was somebody from India and some other places. And I said, I just want us to be aware of what message that the flag might be giving to people, especially when it's that much bigger than our cross. We ended up buying a new flag that looked much better, and it was a bit smaller, I believe. And we decided to put that up in the future for maybe 4th of July, Veterans Day, Memorial Day, whatever. But somebody else said, well, for this lady from Japan, we've just experienced a major tragedy, Fukushima. You'll remember that from several years ago. And they said, would it be okay if she put a flag of Japan up? And just so that we could remember to pray for the people of Japan. And I said, well, we're a Christian church. We're not the American church. And so it's okay with me as a symbol of a reminder to pray for people in other parts of the world. As I considered what it means to be a countercultural community, I thought, wow, there is a lot of stuff going on outside these walls that I think is very different from what I imagine the world would look like if we all took God's love seriously. And one of the things I really appreciate about being an American and living in this country is the fact that we have freedom of religion and freedom of speech. And yesterday, there were people, at least 100,000, maybe hundreds of thousands. I didn't watch the news this morning, but there were many, many thousands of people demonstrating in our nation's capital, down by the airport here on this island, and all over the country, demonstrating for families on the Mexican-American border. And people who were saying, that just doesn't seem very loving to me. And I was so glad that there were people down there. Some of the people that are sitting in the church today were down there demonstrating, and I thought, thank God in our country, we can stand up and say, I disagree with what's going on. Now, I've also seen some Facebook posts since then of people that stand firm with our president and the administration and the attorney general saying, well, this is what I believe. And I thought, well, I might disagree with those people, but I'm really glad that in our country, we don't have to be afraid of standing up and saying what I believe and what my values are. One of the things that came out of the conversation with the church that I had referenced a moment ago was that I had the opportunity to share some things with them that I've shared with you in the past. Things like, my job is never to tell you what to vote for or who to vote for. Also, I am committed to never make fun of you if you disagree with me politically or otherwise, or demonize you. You have the right to say whatever it is that you believe, that whatever it is that you want for our country, and I might completely disagree with you, and I'm happy to tell you so, and I hope you will tell me when you disagree with me. It was a wonderful conversation that I had with the people, the church council back then, and it got us talking about things that the church there, I don't think had ever talked about before. Today, I'm going to throw something out as a springboard for conversation. And I hope that you'll talk about it amongst yourselves and with me and at our next book group on Wednesday night, a week from this coming Wednesday. But I just wanted to say that there's a lot that I see going on out there that bothers me. A lot going on in our government that I don't like necessarily at all. And one of the things that irks me, probably more than anything else, is when people quote the Bible out of context to make their point for their agenda. And I think you all know from, if you've watched the news at all, when Attorney General Jeff Sessions basically was talking about immigration policy on the border, and he said, I wonder if I have the quote here, I think you know what I'm talking about. I would cite you to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government because God has ordained them for the purpose of order. And I remember listening to that thinking, so what he's telling us is whatever the government says, we have to believe that that's God's will and we're supposed to go along with it. And I thought, no. Alan Bosak, the theologian from South Africa, was here on this island a few years ago, and he was imprisoned in South Africa. He was in a jail cell, a prison cell in South Africa for speaking up against his government, and his interrogator came in and quoted that very same Bible verse to him, and he said, why are you breaking the law? You don't care about God, you don't care about the government. It says right here, obey the law. It's God's will that you obey the law, whatever we tell you to do. And he just very quietly, in his own passive way, said, why did you stop there? And the interrogator had no idea what he was talking about because he'd only read that little part of Romans 13. And he said, well, if you continue on, it tells us that the government is there to serve the good of the people. And he said, I can't wait to obey all the laws of this government when the government is there to serve for the good of the people. And I mean all the people, not just the white people. And when he said that, I remember thinking, good for you. Good for you for looking at the Bible in context rather than just picking something out to make your point. And as I was thinking about this, there's a couple things I wanted to point out. One is, as you read through the scriptures, it's so important to look at the context. It was one of the first things I learned in seminary. You can't just pick anything you want out of the Bible and say, well, this fits into my ideology, so therefore I'm going to use this as an argument against everybody I disagree with. When I look at the Bible, I look at the whole Bible, first of all. What is the underlying message of the Bible? And I'll just tell you, it's love, it's compassion, it's grace, it's mercy, it's God's love for all of us. But also, when I look at a particular place in the Bible, I always want to read what comes right before it and what's right after it, because the context informs the meaning of the text that we are looking at. For example, I'm going to read to you what comes right before the quote that the Attorney General said. These are the words of Paul, and in some cases, you'll recognize that he's quoting the words from Jesus. Let love be genuine. Hate what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with mutual affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not lag in zeal. Be ardent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in suffering. Persevere in prayer. And this is where it gets really interesting. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Do not claim to be wiser than you are. If your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. For by doing this, you will heap burning coals on their heads. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And then hear the words that come right after the quote from the Attorney General. Owe no one anything except to love one another. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word, love your neighbor as yourself. Later that day, or perhaps it was the next day, I was looking at the news on my computer, and I saw that Sarah Huckabee was basically backing up exactly what Jeff Sessions had just said. And I thought, this just doesn't set well with me for the same reasons that I just gave you. She said, it is very biblical to enforce the law. This is actually repeated a number of times throughout the Bible. And I remember thinking, where? There is this one passage in Romans, and there's a few other places where Jesus, for example, refers to giving to Caesar what is Caesar's and paying your taxes. But from listening to the press secretary talk, you would think that over and over and over and over, Jesus said, obey the law, obey the law, obey the law, and it's just not there. But I decided to look up some words that Jesus did say over and over and over, and some words that are in the Bible over and over and over. And I thought, if our theology and our politics are going to be informed by what's repeated in the Bible over and over, listen to this. The word grace is found over 100 times. Mercy, over 130 times. Justice, also over 130 times. Truth, 140 times. And guess which word is repeated over 600 times? Love. As I was reading the words from this morning's gospel lesson, do to others as you would have them do to you. Love your enemies. Give to them without expecting anything back. Do good to them. Be merciful as God is merciful. I thought, those are the words that inform my understanding of what the church needs to be, regardless of what our government does, really. That's who we are. That's really the definition of our being, our essence as a church. We love. If we're to be like God, we are to be unconditional love. Now, that I've said that, I know that we are going to have disagreements in terms of how that looks in the end and how to get there. And that's okay, because I've yet to meet, I think, a single person that I agree with all the time about everything. But here's the thing. If we know that love is both the means and the end, can we agree that that's where we go to when we decide what our actions are going to be and what kind of politics that we are going to support? Love, compassion, grace, mercy, loving kindness, or in the Hawaiian Bible, aloha. These are troubling times for our country, and we are becoming more divided than I have seen in a very, very long time. And I think the only way that we're going to get through this is if we can all come together and say, love is our starting place, and our middle place, and our ending place. We don't know yet what that's going to look like, but please, let's agree that that's what we're doing here. Amen.